So yesterday we started with neoplasia, and we said neoplasia means uncontrolled monal proliferation of cells. So um, we said it's actually due to a genetic aberration that is affecting a single cell, and that single cell begins to divide uncontrollably, and it gives rise to daughter cells that has um, that mutation. So it's not due to two or more cells having those mutations. So it's just due to one cell having it, then dividing into other cells that carries the mutation. So we said it can be benign or malignant. And we said a benign tumor usually they are well demarcated, they are well differentiated, they contain little mitotic figures, they have no area of necrosis, they don't show local invasion, they are not metastatic. So taking it one by one, a benign tumor is a tumor that doesn't spread. It is a localized tumor. It is a tumor that is well demarcated. It doesn't grow beyond its margin. It is a tumor that is well differentiated. That is, it looks very much alike as the other surrounding cell. If you look at the nucleus, it has very few mitotic figure. That is not dividing uncontrollably like that. It's dividing fine, but it is not excessive. That's the word, not uncontrollable, but it is not excessive. Unlike what you have in a malignant tumor that shows excessive growth, the mitotic figures that you are going to see there is going to be very high. That tumor is not likely to be well differentiated. It's going to be poorly differentiated because they will not resemble the background cells because they are not using their own energy to look at those cells. They are using energy they are getting to grow. So that is why they become poorly differentiated. They don't look like the other surrounding cell. And we said they have tendency of showing local invasion as well as metastasis because they are separated from their basal lamina, they are separated from the basal membrane. They can go to any side of the body. And lastly, we said they have areas of necrosis because there's a high tendency that the proliferative ability of this cancer is going to outweigh the blood supply. So you will see that some areas will be necrotic at the end of the day. So we said a tumor has two components, the parenchyma, which is a neoplastic cell itself, and the supporting stroma. So the stroma is the framework that is supporting that neoplastic cell in terms of the connective tissue scaffold as well as the surrounding blood vessels. Even in lymphatics, they are part of the supporting stroma. So we said neoplasia is usually like a spectrum. So it can start from a normal cell and eventually get to the neoplastic stage. So normal cells usually show the normal basal apical polarity. So we said that by saying once you look at the cell in a microscope, you can see the part that is attached to the basal membrane, which is a basal pole, and you can see the part that is opposite the basal membrane, which is the apical pole. So that is a secretory pole. So if the cell is involved in producing some proteins or enzymes, they secrete it through the apical pole. The basal pole is the one that is attached to the basal membrane. So a normal cell will have that basal apical polarity. You'll be able to separate those poles. Okay, this is the basal pole, this is the apical pole. But a normal cell can progress to become dysplastic due to maybe an irritant and an irritating stimulus. For example, someone that's smoking or someone that has that's consuming alcohol or someone that has a chronic infection. All these things can tilt the cell towards metaplastic as well as dysplastic changes. So we said dysplasia usually occurs as from background metaplasia or hyperplasia. One of them will be in the background that will now develop into dysplasia. And we said, what are those things I want to look at as regards dysplasia? We want to look at the cell itself. What's the size? What's the shape? There's going to be a distortion of the cell size and the shape, and overall, there's a loss of tissue orientation. Then, in addition to looking at the cell size and shape that is distorted, that is lost in terms of uniformity, we want to look at the nucleus. What are the nuclear changes? There's an increase in the nuclear cytoplasmic ratio for dysplasia, and there's also nuclear clumping, and it occurs in stages: the mild, the moderate, and the severe. So the mild and the moderate are just when that dysplastic change has gotten to from the hub to the middle. By the time it's getting to the basal layer, we say it's severe dysplasia or carcinoma in situ. and the mild moderate forms are reversible. Why the one that has got into the basal layer, which is the severe one, is irreversible? That's the one that will definitely develop into invasive carcinoma. So from mild moderate dysplasia, it can progress to carcinoma in situ or pre-invasive form, which is the irreversible severe dysplasia that involves the entire thickness of the epithelium. It has got into the basal layer, but it has not penetrated intact basement membrane. So once those tumor penetrate the intact basement membrane, they divide it by the activity of the collagenase or hydroxylase, which are metalloproteinase enzyme. They are able to find their way into the environment, like the blood vessels or the other tissues that are surrounding. And we said before that one can even happen, there's a tendency that the cells will have started separating from each other. So there's inactivation of the E-cadherin, which is a cell-to-cell addition molecule. So if there's a loss of function of the E-cadherin, the cells cannot adhere to each other. They are separated. They descend downwards. When they get to the basement membrane, they release collagenase that will cleave off the basement membrane, and they will find their way into the tissue as well as the blood. And from there, they can now metastasize to other areas through the process of metastasis. Yeah, I would say the metastatic route can be hematogenous or truly lymphatics. We said for sarcomas, you think more of hematogenous blood. For carcinoma, they are through the lymphatics. Lymphatics for carcinoma, sarcoma, hematogenous. But there are some exceptions to the carcinomatous rule of lymphatic spread. There are some carcinomas that don't go through that lymphatic, they go to the blood. So we said we have to remember the lung, the liver, and the kidneys. The liver and the kidney. So hepatocellular carcinoma, renal cell carcinoma. Then we had our follicular thyroid carcinoma and choriocarcinoma to that. So FC portion of IgG, follicular thyroid carcinoma, choriocarcinoma, renal cell carcinoma, hepatocellular carcinoma. They are carcinomas that don't go through the lymphatics, but they go through the blood. So start talking about the nomenclature. We said carcinoma is of epithelial origin, sarcoma mesenchymal origin, and both of them mean malignancy. They mean cancer. They mean cancer in malignancy. So, so we've talked about this. Then we also talked about the concept of hematoma and then cholestoma. So we said hematoma is just disorganized arrangement of tissues within a particular organ or location. So the cells are growing normally, but there's a disorganization in the arrangement. So at the end of the day, they will clump together and they will form a mass. So there's a disorganized overgrowth in a particular area. So they are not tumors because they don't grow at a higher rate compared to the surrounding tissue. They both grow at the same rate, but it's just the organization that is different. So that's why they will agglutinate together, they will come together, they will clump together, they will form a mass. That's hematoma. So you can have that as a polyp in the colon. You can have it as a mass in the lungs, like lung hematoma. You can have it in the brain hematoma. You can have it almost everywhere. Then cholestoma is just talking about a normal tissue that is
But
found.
are you saying hematoma or hamartomas? Which one?
Sorry, amatomas. Yeah,
And so what about them?
yeah. So we said they are disorganized arrangement of tissues in a particular organ. So, for example, if you are looking at the breast now, the breast consists of so many tissues out there. We have the glandular tissue, we have the fat tissue, we have the blood vessels. So if you don't have orderly arrangement of those tissues within that breast mass or that breast itself, that breast organ, you can have an amatoma rather, growing from there if there's a disorganization in the arrangement of the tissues at that location. So it is not actually due to the fact that one is growing more than another, like what you have in tumors. No, it's just that the arrangement of the tissues, they are disorganized. So it will not lead to an overgrowth. The overgrowth they are saying here is not that one is growing more. They are just talking about a mass. So it will lead to formation of a mass. So amatomas appears like mass within the organs that they are affecting. You see them, they are mass due to disorganization in the arrangement of the tissues at that particular organ. So that's what you want to look out for. So, and those tissues are actually containing cells that are native to that tissue. The normal cells that should be there are the ones that are there. The fat cells that should be in the breast are the ones that are there. The blood vessels, the glandular epithelial cells, they are the ones there. It is not due to any other cells coming around. Yeah, it's just a arrangement that is different. So it's in a disorganized arrangement. But for choristoma, they are just when you have a normal tissue that is present in an abnormal location. So you have the pancreas in the stomach. You call that heterotropic pancreas. That is an example of a choristoma. So a pancreatic tissue that is located in the stomach is a choristoma. Normal tissue is a foreign location. Or a gastric tissue in the ileum as Meckel diverticulum. So that is why Meckel diverticulum can cause bleeding because they contain gastric tissue. And those gastric tissue will be secreting acid that can irritate the epithelium of the ileum that cause bleeding. So it can cause abdominal pain, you know. So that is an example of a choristoma, a normal tissue in a foreign location. So what are the cell types and their nomenclature? So we said we are looking at two basic cell types, the epithelium and the mesenchyme. So they can be benign or malignant. So for benign form of epithelial changes, they can be adenoma. Some of them can have papillary projection or finger-like projection, and you call them papilloma. So this adenoma is actually from glands. So when you are talking about a benign change of epithelium surrounding a gland, you call it adenoma. Adenoma. So you can have gastric adenoma. You can have pancreatic adenoma, and all those things. So adenoma is just um, a benign change or a benign tumor of a epithelium lining a gland, adenoma. So when you have an epithelial benign change with finger-like projection, you call that papilloma. So you can have so many papilloma. Bladder papilloma, you can have skin papilloma, different type of papilloma. So it's also an epithelial tumor. But when you have their malignant form, you call them adenocarcinoma. That's the commonest one. So adenocarcinoma, papillary carcinoma. So mesenchymal cells, there are a lot. So blood vessels, the blood cells, the smooth muscle, the striated muscle, connective tissue, bone, fat, melanocytes. So taking them one by one, we said blood cells, we don't have benign form of blood cells. Yeah. From starting, they are metastatic. They can go anywhere because they are already in the blood. So they are malignant. An example of blood cell tumor is leukemia or lymphoma. So we talked about the blood vessels too, separate from the blood cells. Both of them are mesenchymal tissue, and angiosarcoma is the malignant form of uh, uh, tumor affecting the blood vessels. When it is malignant, when it is benign, we call that hemangioma. So hemangioma is the benign form. Angiosarcoma is the malignant form. And sorry, I want to make a correction. I think yesterday I said with respect to angiosarcoma, we should pay attention to radon. So radon is not there. That's a mistake. So it should be polyvinyl chloride, like we said, and arsenic. Those are the two guys that are capable of causing angiosarcoma of the liver, especially. So arsenic, oh, please. Arsenic and polyvinyl chloride. Those are the things that can cause angiosarcoma, that is endothelial or blood vessel tumor of a particular organ, which is malignant. For the smooth muscle, you remember the word, the nomenclature is leiomyo. Leiomyo. So if it's benign, leiomyoma. If it's malignant, leiomyosarcoma. So for striated, rhabdomyoma. For the malignant, rhabdomyosarcoma. Rhabdo means striated muscle, be it that of the skeletal muscle or the cardiac muscle. Both of them, they are striated muscle. So you must call them rhabdomyoma, cardiac rhabdomyosarcoma. Connective tissue, fibrous connective tissue can be benign fibroma or malignant fibrosarcoma. The bone, osteoma or osteosarcoma. The fat, lipoma or liposarcoma. The melanocyte, the benign form, mole or nevus, then the malignant is the melanoma. So melanoma is just one of the misnomers. So don't get it confused that this guy is ending with oma. and it's malignant. So yes, so it is malignant. It is malignant. Uh, hepatoma. Hepatocellular carcinoma is also called hepatoma, and it is malignant. So it's not in every time that when you see Oma that you think it's malignant, it's benign. So melanoma is an example. Melanoma is a malignant tumor. The benign form of melanoma is mole or nevus. Then we talked about the tumor grade and stage. Then we said the grade is when we are talking about the degree of differentiation. So how well differentiated is this tumor? How well does it resembles the surrounding tissue where it's coming from? So if it resembles them very well, it means it's a low grade tumor. So if it's quite very different from them, they look so odd, it is poorly differentiated. And those are the features of a malignant tumor. They are poorly differentiated and they are also called anaplastic. So they can be poorly differentiated or undifferentiated at all. So when it doesn't even look at it at all, you call it undifferentiated or anaplastic tumor. That's a very aggressive one. So the higher the grade, the more aggressive the tumor is. Then the next one is when we talked about the stage, and we said the most common way by which we stage is by using the TNM staging, which is based on our clinical and pathologic findings. So we are using our clinical and pathologic findings to perform the TNM staging. So the component of the TNM means the T for the tumor size, the N for the node metastasis, and the M for the distant metastasis. And in order of relevance, M is the most important, which is metastasis. So it can be M0 or M1. If there's no metastasis, M0. If there's metastasis, M1. And we can figure out if there's a metastasis by doing our PET scan or doing our CT scan. Most times, yes. Although you can have a rough idea from the clinical presentation. Let's say somebody is having a breast cancer. You are seeing a breast mass. Suddenly the person started developing jaundice, or the person develops uh, brain manifestation like convulsion, confusion, all those things, like likely to be a brain metastasis. So that can give us an idea clinically that there's a metastasis. But the best way to confirm metastasis is by doing your investigation, your imaging. So imaging are part of clinical findings. They are classified with the clinical. So the ones we do from our own examination, coupled with the imaging, they are part of the clinical. So why the one that is strictly on histology, biopsy, cytology, those are the pathologic findings. So then the next one is the regional lymph node metastasis. So we want to know if the nodes are affected so that you can also stage that. So the grading for the lymph node metastasis ranges from N0 to like N3, depending on the number of lymph node that is affected. So you can establish that also from your clinical examination and palpation, as well as your radiologic imaging. Then the last one is the primary tumor size. So of course you can also confirm lymph node metastasis by doing your biopsy. So you can biopsy your lymph node and see if you have those malignant cells there. Then for the primary tumor size, that's the last one, T. So basically that one is strictly from your imaging. Your CT scan, you measure the tumor in the greatest dimension to be able to establish its size. So you can grade that from T0 to T4. So from there you can now assign the values. Is the tumor T1, N2, M1, or T2, N3, M0? So that will give the clinicians the best approach to manage that. That is beyond the scope of our discussion. So that is just to give us an idea of how the staging is done. And stage is actually more important than grade in terms of prognostic significance. So a bad stage or an advanced stage is more is bad than a low grade or a high grade rather. So yeah. So the prognosis for an advanced stage is worse than uh an high grade. Yeah. So what are the hallmarks of cancer? So we're talking about some things that cancers use or utilize to make them cancers. So what are the approach by which they take to become cancer? So we started with talking about some pathways which I just quickly talked about, and I feel that if we're able to learn that pathway, it will actually help us understand some of those things very well, because the 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 molecular explanation is actually very complex. It's very complex. You have to talk about a lot of proteins, a lot of things which we don't need. Yeah. So, but the summary is that most of them start from a growth signal. So there's a growth signal like what we growth factor, let's say epidermal growth factor, which acts on its own receptor, stimulate epidermal growth factor receptor. Some of those receptors have some enzymatic activity, like tyrosine kinase activity. So once you have the growth factor binding to the receptor, it can cause dimerization of those receptors. They will dimerize. Two receptors will join together. They will activate their tyrosine kinase activity that will phosphorylate thyroxine on the cytoplasmic portion of that receptor. When that happens, it will activate a downstream signaling molecule. Some of the signaling pathway includes RAS. Some of them I use WNT. Some of them I use PI3K. There's a lot of them. We don't need to memorize them. So just know one or two. RAS is okay. RAS is one of the commonest signaling molecule that they usually test. RAS. So after that receptor has been dimerized and they have activated their tyrosine kinase, they can activate the signaling pathway, which is RAS. The next thing that the RAS will do is that it will do so many processes, but the process will culminate in activation of a transcription factor. That transcription factor is, from our biochemistry, a transcription factor is just a factor that is involved in controlling the expression of a gene. But because what we are dealing with now is growth, so that transcription factor that is going to be activated from the signaling molecule is going to transcribe genes that are controlling cell division, that are controlling growth. It's going to transcribe um, genes that can produce protein that can allow for growth to happen. That's what they do. Example of such transcription factor is MIC. So it's very, very important to understand the station between MIC and RAS. Yes. So RAS is a signaling molecule that can activate some transition factors downstream, and some of those transition factors include MIC. So we have three forms of MIC. We have C-MIC, M-MIC, and all those things. So C-MIC is very important, particularly in some cancer like Burkitt lymphoma. N-MIC is also important in someone as neuroblastoma. So we are going to talk about them later. Then the transition factors will increase the expression of a protein that can cause growth. So it makes sense for us to be able to say that transition factors can increase elaboration of cell cycle regulators like cyclins and cyclin dependent kinases. These are proteins, and these guys allow for growth by allowing the cell to proceed from G1 phase to the S phase. We can see that it's like a progression. So if you have more cyclins, that means that the cell is going to grow more. That is it. They're going to enter the G1 phase and they are going to start replicating. If something enters the S phase, it's going to replicate the DNA. That's one of those things that is done in the S phase. So from there, they'll start replicating themselves and they'll be more in number. Now, what cancer can now do is that they can try to harness or hijack any of these pathways. They can decide to be overproducing growth factors. They can decide to be causing excessive stimulation of the growth factor receptors. They can decide to be causing overworking of the signaling molecule. They can decide to overproduce transition factors. They can decide to overproduce proteins that are encoded by some of the transition factors, which allows for growth, like cycling. So cancer can affect any of these pathways. And when they affect any of these pathways, because this is the growth or cell division pathway, they will be able to achieve what we call growth factor self-sufficiency. Growth factor signal self, because they don't need anything to stimulate that growth. They are already constitutionally active. They don't need anything to stimulate them because they have any of this pathway activated automatically. So that can allow for the growth to happen uncontrolled. So some of them might decide not to go through the growth pathway and they just decide to shut up all the anti-growth signals. That is, the signals that are responsible for preventing growth. They try to take them out. For example, somebody having retinoblastoma mutation. So retinoblastoma normally is known as something that stops growth. It kind of inhibit G1 to S progression. So for our cyclin or CDK to be able to cause that G1 to S progression, they need to take out retinoblastoma. So they will phosphorylate retinoblastoma so that retinoblastoma can release the E2F factor. E2F factor is now what will now stimulate that G1 to S phase progression. But when you have no retinoblastoma, that means that you don't have any obstruction to growth. That means that growth will just be happening. So that's an example of an anti-growth signal insensitivity. You take out anti-growth signal, your body will now become insensitive to them because they are not available again. So take out anything that inhibits growth. Don't go for overstimulation of something that allows for growth. Why not go for suppression of something that inhibits growth, like retinoblastoma, a tumor suppressor? That's one mechanism. And that mechanism is inhibiting some particular molecules that helps the body achieve contact inhibition. So we said contact inhibition is another anti-growth signal, such that when cells are together, they are in contact, they inhibit and suppress their growth. That is it. But once you separate those cells, it's like you are calling them malignancy. They just separate and they fire and they continue proliferating and they travel. There's something called constant inhibition that is achieved by the presence of some particular proteins. One of them is ikaderin. Another one is melingin from someone that has neurofibromatosis type 2. Melingin, ikaderin helps to adhere those cells together. So once those cells are adhered together, they don't grow. That is contact inhibition. But when there's loss of ikaderin that adheres the cell together, the cells are opposed and they can grow independently. So that means that it is reasonable to say that when there's a loss of ikaderin, there's a loss of contact inhibition and the cells continue to grow uncontrollably. And another example of that is when we're talking about the melingin. So melingin can also function as ikaderin. It also helps to adhere the cells together and prevent and allow for contact inhibition and prevent overgrowth. But once you have loss of function mutation in melingin, loss of function mutation, please, you have to take note of those languages. Loss of function mutation, a mutation that leads to loss of function of the protein. That protein doesn't exist again to initiate contact inhibition, and the cells continue to grow. Another mechanism, if they don't want to
Sorry,
overstimulate the
Dr. Wale. What gene are you mentioning? You said what? Melin gene.
yes, melin protein from melingin. Melin protein from melingin.
Okay. All right. I was looking for it on the page. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so some of them can invade apoptosis. They don't want to die again. So they are not overstimulating growth factor. They are not shutting off the anti-growth factor. But what they are attacking is actually apoptosis. Since it's apoptosis that can make them die, they want to live forever. They invade apoptosis. That's another mechanism. So they just try to attack those proteins that are involved in initiating the process of apoptosis, like T53. So why not take care of T53, silence it, trigger a loss of function mutation in T53 so that there's no T53 again to initiate apoptosis. That is one mechanism. Some of them can overstimulate genes that suppress apoptosis initially. T53 initiate apoptosis, shut it off. BCL2 inhibit apoptosis, let it live. Cause a gain of function mutation in BCL2 so that you have overexpression of BCL2 and you can make the cells live forever. That is the principle of follicular B-cell carcinoma. So they have a chromosome 14-18 translocation. So the BCL2 is located on the chromosome 18. So the long arm of the chromosome, the heavy chain of the immunoglobulin is on chromosome 14. So by the time you have that translocation, there's a constitutional activation of BCL2. So BCL2 starts being overproduced and it starts inhibiting apoptosis in that B cell. So the B cell doesn't die and they continue to exist for life. So another way is by initiating limitless replicative potential. Like I would say, I don't feel you guys need to memorize all these things. By the time you read the question, you'll be able to figure out what they are saying. You don't need to cram it. You don't need to know all of them. Once you read the question, you know which of the following hallmarks they are testing. So, limited replicative potential. So this one is just talking about reactivation of telomeres. We have said it that as cells divide, they lose or there's a shortening of the telomeres. So telomeres are like sequence of DNA that are attached to the ends of chromosomes. As the chromosomes divide, as the cells divide, there's a shortening of those telomeres within the chromosome ends. When it shortens to a level, it's going to be recognized by the cells of the body as being senile, as being old, as being aged, and they want to take it out by apoptosis. So what the tumor will now do is now to recruit the activity of telomerase, which is an enzyme that has an RNA-dependent DNA polymerase activity. RNA dependent because it acts on RNA and convert them to DNA. So that is the DNA polymerase. RNA dependent DNA polymerase. That is an RNA dependent molecule that produces DNA. That's what it means. So they start converting DNA, RNA to DNA so that they can start adding those DNA to the ends of the telomerase. So that with division, those cells don't have reduction in their telomere length, and they will not be regarded as being old or senile, and they will not be flagged for apoptosis, and they will exist for life. So a typical cell is supposed to die after like 50 to 60 division, but that doesn't happen for cancer that has caused reactivation of telomeres. No. Another mechanism is to sustain angiogenesis. This one is very good because it will provide more blood supply to deliver more nutrients that can sustain their uncontrolled proliferation, and is also going to generate more vessels for them to travel to the other side of the body. They can achieve angiogenesis by two ways. Either they stimulate neoangiogenesis or they cause vasculogenesis. And we said vasculogenesis is when they recruit those endothelial cells from the bone marrow and they try to form new blood vessels. And we said neoangiogenesis is when you form new capillaries from existing capillaries. And what are the factors that are responsible for this? Elaboration of vascular endothelial growth factors. I think that is important. Or they can suppress the expression of the inhibitory factors that inhibit the growth of the vessels, like thrombospondin. Then I said another factor that is important is the Warburg effect. The Warburg effect. So we said the Warburg effect is just when a cell is not dedicating its pyruvate to oxidative phosphorylation. So all the pyruvates are being channeled towards the anaerobic pathway, that is, they are being converted to lactate, so that you don't waste your pyruvate. Because if you convert your pyruvate to lactate and you are generating only 2 ATP, you can easily convert that lactate back to the pyruvate so that the pyruvate can go back as if it's going towards glycolysis to produce other upstream molecules like fructose 6-phosphate, glucose 6-phosphate, and the glucose 6-phosphate can enter HMP shunts to form ribose 5-phosphate, which can be a carbon source for production of our purine bases or pyrimidine bases, so that they can be incorporated into synthesis of DNA and you can have proliferation of those cancerous cells. But if you are having all your pyruvate channel towards the oxidative phosphorylation and they are being broken down completely, there's no source of the carbon atom for the cells to use, so they will die. So that is the Warburg effect. Aerobic glycolysis. You call that aerobic glycolysis because the cells still continue to use glucose through the glycolytic pathway despite the presence of oxygen. Aerobic glycolysis, Warburg effect. And the reason is just to be able to generate more carbon atoms for synthesis of cellular structures, DNA, protein, amino acid, fat, all those things. Then we talked about immune evasion in cancer. We said there are ways by which the cancer tends to evade immune cells. They don't allow immune cells to see them. Number one, they can downregulate their MHC class 1. So when they downregulate the MHC class 1, there's no way they can be recognized by the cytotoxic T cells. There's no way they can be recognized by the cytotoxic T cells. Another way is that they can stimulate regulatory T cells to be releasing transforming beta growth factor as well as interleukin 10 to dampen the immune response so that they don't initiate immune response. And the third way is that they can upregulate immune checkpoint molecules, like when we are talking about the PD ligand 1 and the PD1. So the PD1 is on the T cell, while the ligand is on the tumor. So by the time the tumor upregulates its own PDL1, interacting with the PD1 receptor on the T cell, it will dampen the activation of that T cell, and the T cell will not want to participate in immune response with you. So there's no way it can take care of the cancer. Those three mechanisms. You downregulate the MHC1 so that they are not recognized. You upregulate secretion of immunosuppressive factors or anti-inflammatory cytokines like TGF beta and interleukin 10 to downregulate immune response. Or you upregulate the immune checkpoint molecules like your PD-L1 and PD-1. Then the next one is tissue invasion. Tissue invasion is just when you are able to invade the tissues. You move across the basement membrane into the tissues, invasive carcinoma. So how do they do this? They first lose their E-cadherin action. Once there's loss of E-cadherin action, automatically there's loss of contact inhibition. They can start growing from there. And because of the fact that cadherin also helps to hold them together, they are not held together. They start moving towards the basement membrane. When they get to the basement membrane, they release their metalloproteinase that degrade the basement membrane and the extracellular matrix. They are going to find a way to attach to those extracellular matrix protein like laminin and fibronectin to be able to move into the vessel and cause vascular dissemination, which will eventually bring about metastasis. But that is not enough. Those guys entering the vessels doesn't mean they will metastasize. They need to also do some things like attaching to the endothelium. They need to attach to the endothelium and travel through that endothelium cells to the tissue of their destination. So the first capillary bed that they encounter, that's where they are going to stop. And they are going to extravasate from those capillary beds into the tissue that capillary bed is supplying. When they extravasate into that tissue, there's now the process of homing. So homing is now making that tissue your new home. They try to adapt to that area. So they tend to synthesize new blood vessels to supply them, and they start growing into secondary tumors. So by the time a tumor gets to a region, proliferate, form new blood vessels, and establish secondary cells, you call that homing. So usually where the tumor is going to first lodge is determined by the first capillary bed that is going to encounter after it disseminates. But we said some cancers still show tropism, like lung cancer having predilection for going to the adrenals. They have predilection for also going to the brain. So I gave an example of the explanation for the capillary bed has been very easily explained with colon cancer going to the liver. So if somebody has a colon cancer and that colon cancer disseminates into the supramesenteric vein, and because of the fact that we said that the hepatic portal vein is formed by the joining of the splenic vein with the supramesenteric vein, it means that it can easily go to the hepatic portal vein, and the first tissue that they are going to encounter is the liver, because the portal vein directly supplies the liver. Yeah. So that is why liver is the first site of dissemination of a colon cancer. Then we start talking about the immune checkpoint interaction. So we said.
Sorry, Baba, well, I think that's the last thing you said. Sorry.
So, did you get it up to dissemination into the superior mesenteric vein?
Oh no, that's where I missed it.
So, when the colon cancer gets into the superior mesenteric vein and the splenic vein, they join together to form the hepatic portal vein.
Okay.
So, by the time the tumor gets to the superior mesenteric vein, it enters the hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic portal vein carries it to the liver. So that is the reason why colon cancer, go to the liver firstly before it enters the other tissues.
Okay.
So we talked about the immune checkpoint interaction. Yes, so which is interaction between the T cell and either the antigen presenting cell or the tumor cell. So there are so many interactions that happens in them, and we try to modulate some of those interactions to our own benefit. So let's talk about the first interaction, that is the interaction between the T cell and the antigen presenting cell. So if an antigen presenting cell delivers an antigen to the T cell and the T cell is tired, of initiating immune response, or if there is tendency that that antigen presenting cell is delivering to that T cell is a self antigen and the T cell doesn't want to react, what will it do? It will express a molecule that we call CTLA4. So CTLA4 is actually stopping the co-stimulatory signal. We have said it before that the co-stimulatory signal is an interaction between the CD28 on the T cell and the B7 on the antigen presenting cell. So once the T cell expresses that CTLA4, it's going to bind to the B7 on the antigen presenting cell and stop that co-stimulatory signal so that the T cell will not become activated at all. So in a way, you are suppressing T cell activation. Now, we now use it to our benefit in terms of treatment of cancer by giving an antibody against CTLA4 so that by the time we block CTLA4, we can permanently activate our T cell because there's nothing to allow the T cell rest. The CD28 has no competitor. It can easily bind to its B7 and it can activate the T cell. So by the time you keep your T cell activated, you can take care of the cancer that are there because CD8 cells typically helps in mopping up our cancers. So that is why one of the therapies for treating cancer can be CTLA4 antibodies like ipilimumab. That is one. Another checkpoint is interaction between T cell and tumor cell. We said it that some tumor cells they utilize immune checkpoint interaction for their own benefit so that they can suppress immune response. The tumor cells will elaborate PDL1 and the T cells already have PD1 on them. So when the tumor cells upregulate their PDL1, the PDL1 ligand interacts with the PD1 receptor on the T cell, and when that interaction happens, it suppresses the T cell, keep them inactivated. Now, we are now devising a new way to treat cancer by providing targets against PDL1 or PD1. And I said the common one that they ask is when you are able to devise antibody against the PD1, particularly pembrolizumab. So by the time you do that, you don't allow that PDL1, PD1 interaction to happen. And your T cell becomes constitutionally activated and it will be able to treat the fuck up of that cancer cell. That is it. So, we talked about cancer epidemiology. We said skin cancer is the commonest and it occurs in the spectrum, the basal, the squamous, and the melanoma. So basal is the commonest, squamous is the next, melanoma is the third. So having said that, we also looked at the other cancers in terms of their own incidence and mortality. So we said for males, the prostate is the commonest, the lungs the next, the colon, rectum are the third. Then for females, similar thing happens, just switch the prostate to the breast. So if prostate is the commonest for the male and the lung is the next and colorectal is the third, for female, you just remove the prostate, you replace it with breast. Then your lung and your colorectal still stays. But for cancer mortality, it changes. Lungs is the most deadly. Even though the most common cause of death in the US is not cancer, but heart disease. But amongst the cancer, lungs is the most fatal. So lung for both sexes, then prostate for the male, breast for the female, then the colorectal for both of them. But it changes for children. For children, when you have IS, is leukemia. So yes, so leukemia is number 1, then CNS number 2, neuroblastoma number 3. Leukemia, CNS, neuroblastoma. The same thing also happens for the mortality. Leukemia kills them the most, CNS tumor is the next, neuroblastoma the third. We've talked about this before, the common side of metastasis. Carcinoma wants to use the lymphatics, sarcomas wants to use the blood. But there are some 4 carcinomas that are rogue carcinomas. The FC, follicular thyroid, and the choriocarcinomas, then our liver and the kidney, hepatocellular and renal cell. So we said that metastasis are a part of the body that once you find metastasis in those parts, or once you find a tumor in those parts rather, it is very, very likely to be a met. It's likely to be a metastasis. So what are these regions? the BB, the breast, the bone. Sorry, I said breast. The brain, the bone, the liver, and the lung. So the brain, the bone, the liver, the lung. The brain, the bone, the liver, the lung. Yeah. So for the bone, we've said it that prostate has the most affinity for the Pope. Then breast is second for all of them. All of them is breast that is second. Then the third one for the bone is the lung. Yeah. So I feel that if we are able to remember the prostate and the breast, we are okay. And we said anything that is going to the bone has a predilection for affecting the axial skeleton. That is the skeleton from the head, the neck, the ribs, the sternum, down to the sacrum, but sparing the pelvic girdle, the lower limbs, and the upper limbs. That is the appendicular skeleton. But from the head, neck, vertebrae, the ribs, the sternum, down to the sacrum, that is axial skeleton. So we talked about bone metastasis to be blastic and lytic. So blastic is when they are depositing new bone mats, but it doesn't make that bone stronger. So we said the blastic ones are the prostate and the small cell carcinoma, while the other ones are lytic. So if you are saying small cell carcinoma, so you can just change it. Non-small cell carcinoma, colon, the kidneys, the multiple myeloma. I think the most important one that we are supposed to always remember, multiple myeloma for lytic, because one of the typical findings in multiple myeloma is what we call the crab symptoms. So people that have done multiple myeloma will remember crab symptoms. So one of them is bone pain, bone problems, bone issues, bone met. It has lytic effect on the bone, multiple myeloma. Don't forget that. So the one that is mixed is the breast. So most likely, if you are not seeing anything as if you are giving a tumor that is outside the prostate and small cell carcinoma, is likely to be lytic. So the prostate and small cell carcinoma they are not lytic, but they are plastic. So the lytic one will resolve that bone, make it thinner. Osteopenia, yes. So for the liver met, of course, we have explained the reason why colon is the most common. We've said the breast is always the second for everything, and we are picking the pancreas to be the third because pancreas is another GI organ. Liver is a GI organ, so it makes sense for another GI organ to spread to another GI organ, and the metastasis is going to be appear scattered. Then for the lung, we talked about the colon and the breast also for lung. So liver and lung, they are very the same. So
Sorry. Oh, well, sorry, I'm missing out. Maybe a little bit faster.
okay, so I said the colon goes to the liver. You remember the explanation we gave? So then we said the breast is usually the second for all of them. The breast is usually the second for all of them. Like once you remember the first one, breast will always follow. Then I said the next one is the pancreas because the way we can remember that is that pancreas is also a GI organ. So liver is also a GI organ. So it makes sense for the pancreas to be able to spread to the liver. Then we said for the lung, it's just like the liver too. The colon first, the bladder second, the breast second. Then we had an organ that is dual, that is double, because the lung is double. So kidney is the best fit. So kidney, it also spread to the lungs, and it is bilateral. So they really ask all these stuff. No, they don't ask questions like that. That which of following goes to the no. It's going to be application question. So for the brain, the lungs have predilection for going to the brain. The breast is the second one, then melanoma. But they typically occur at the junction of the gray-white matter because we said at this junction there's an alteration of the mechanics of blood flow such that the tumor wants to stay at that area. Maybe the blood flow is very quite slow that it tends to stay in that area and they deposit there. But don't forget, brain number one that wants to come to our mind is the lung. Lung goes to the brain. The breast is always the second for everything, and the colon and the melanoma is the third one. So I don't think we need to worry ourselves about the tumor and the site. We should know it too, but it's not very high you like that. So let's just quickly see if we can talk about the oncogenes. So yes, So oncogenes are just genes that have undergone mutation from their pro to oncogene stage. So a normal gene that drives growth, a gene that codes for a growth factor, is known as a proto-oncogene. When it is normal, we call it proto-oncogene. But when it undergoes mutation and is now causing growth in an uncontrolled manner, we call it an oncogene. An oncogene. And for an oncogenic mutation to cause cancer, you only need one allele of that proto-oncogene to be present in that person. So that means that it is only one chromosome. Let's say that we have chromosome 14, and there's a gene in chromosome 14 that codes for an oncogene. So that person needs to acquire that chromosome 14 that is defective in his father or mother only to achieve that tumor, provided it is an oncogenic gene. That is not the situation for tumor suppressor gene. If the person inherits a defective allele from the father, that is one hit. That is the first hit. The second hit must come. And that one usually comes as a somatic mutation. So it is when the person now develops and starts growing that the second gene will now acquire the mutation, and the person will now have an homozygous appearance of the allele. And the person cannot develop that problem. So for tumor suppressor gene, both alleles needs to be affected. But for oncogene, one allele is enough to start the problem. So all these tyrosine kinase blah blah of a thing, yeah, it's good to know them, but it's actually some specific that are important. Not everything is important. Yes, not everything is important. So let's just talk about them one by one and see. So before we start, you remember that we are talking about oncogenes, and I told us that um, we have a growth pathway which starts from the growth factor, stimulating the growth factor receptor, the receptor having tyrosine kinase activity. Some of them have serine tyrosine kinase deficient, serine kinase activity. Some of them have other kinase activity. But the most common one is tyrosine kinase activity. So when they stimulate the tyrosine kinase activity, they dimerize, they activate a downstream signaling molecule like RAS. So the RAS can also work, activate some protein, which will now lead to activation of a transition factor. An example of a transition factor is MIC. So MIC will now drive expression of a protein that can allow for growth. Such protein includes our cyclin-dependent kinase. Even a transition factor can code for expression of a growth factor because the growth factor is a protein. A transition factor can code for the expression of a growth factor receptor. It is a protein. So just imagine that you have overexpression of a growth factor, overexpression of a transition factor that is encoding a growth factor. At the end of the day, you have elaboration of that growth factor. It's going to be too much and it's going to cause malignancy. So they can work hand in hand. So let's start talking about those tyrosine kinase receptors one by one. So you have some receptors that have tyrosine kinase activity. There are about 4 that we are looking at. So the thing is, there are actually some malignancy that are associated with overexpression of the gene that codes for growth factor only. They did not include them, and I am happy. So we have deleted that. So we now start looking at overproduction of gene that code for growth factor receptor. Example, ALK. Example, epithelial growth factor receptor. So the next one is human epidermal growth factor receptor, HER2. Then the last one is RET. So RET is rearrangement something blah blah. We don't need to be memorizing those names. But RET is a receptor tyrosine kinase 2. That's tyrosine kinase activity. HER, human epidermal growth factor, has receptor tyrosine kinase activity. Human epidermal growth factor receptor has it. ALK is also standing for like anaplastic lymphoma kinase something, has it. Now, if you have overactivation of these guys, you can have malignancy. So let's look at them one by one. The ALK and the epidermal growth factor is actually overexpressed in lung adenocarcinoma only. So the way I remember it is I just look at ALK. ALK is like lung adenocarcinoma, spelling it backwards. So L lung, A adeno. So ALK, lung adenocarcinoma. You see that they are even specific. So they are not saying squamous cell carcinoma of the lung. They are not saying small cell carcinoma of the lung, but they are saying adenocarcinoma of the lung. So I'm throwing this down to the old guy. So if they paint a history of somebody that is not a smoker and the person is having a lung mass, what is the most likely diagnosis? Anybody in the old group? Lung mass that is a non-smoker. What comes to your mind?
Adenocarcinoma of the
Lung
lungs.
adenocarcinoma.
Lung
Adenocarcinoma.
lung adenocarcinoma. So if they ask us what is the gene involved, ALK, 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 yes. So LK, so ALK and this EGFR, they are like the same thing. Just to remember, I'm not saying they are the same thing, just for us to remember. So once you remember ALK, you remember your epidermal growth factor receptor. Both of them have intrinsic receptor tyrosine kinase activity, and they can cause lung adenocarcinoma. You see, right from medical school, I have known this HER2, but I used to, what is this guy? So HER2 is a receptor tyrosine kinase receptor to it. It has tyrosine kinase activity. But one sad part about this HER that cannot go with the code that I gave it is that it doesn't actually need any growth factor to stimulate it. You guys can check. HER2 doesn't have any ligand that stimulates it. It works on its own. It cross-link with another fellow HER receptor, then activate the downstream signal by itself. But what I just want us to remember is that HER2 receptor is located in the breast and the gastric tissue. If you don't remember the gastric tissue, it is fine. But you must not forget that HER2 receptor is present in the breast, because we do immunohistochemistry and then want to look at the receptor that they are expressing. If you are able to find a breast cancer that is positive for HER2, you are happy, because there's a monoclonal antibody that you can develop against this receptor to take care of the breast cancer. So it is known as epidermal growth factor receptor with receptor type, and it is present in the breasts. So it can cause breast cancer. Very, very important. Another one is RET. RET. You see, particularly, I don't really like the way this stuff is arranged, because if we have done the other topics like maybe endocrine, we will have started picking all those mutations one by one. So by the time we are now coming to pathology, we'll be able to relate to them well. But if you are just sitting down and just learning them blindly now, it might be a little bit difficult. But we don't have choice. So that's what we have to do. It's good now that you are getting exposed to them. So by the time we are seeing them in the systems, it will be easy to also remember. So it's just going to be more like a consolidation. So the RET, anytime you see RET, two things must come to your mind: pheochromocytoma and medullary thyroid carcinoma. Because this guy is implicated in the pathophysiology of MEN2A and MEN2B syndrome. Now, what is common to MEN2A and MEN2B syndrome is presence of a tumor in the neck and a tumor in the abdomen. A tumor in the neck and a tumor in the abdomen. So the tumor in the neck is medullary carcinoma with thyroid gland. The one in the abdomen is a pheochromocytoma. Both MEN2A and MEN2B have that. So don't let us talk about what is distinguishing them. Let's leave that one for endocrine. But just know that medullary thyroid cancer and pheochromocytoma, the neck and the abdomen, what is causing them is a RET mutation, which is a receptor tyrosine kinase. So, and that is the reason why they can cause MEN2, and it can cause these tumors individually. That is, RET mutation can cause pheo. It can also cause medullary and papillary thyroid carcinoma. So once you remember medullary, just add papillary to it. Yeah. So it can cause medullary as well as a pheochromocytoma. And when you have these two occurring together, medullary and pheochromocytoma, you call that MEN2A or MEN2B. RET mutation. RET mutation. medullary, and pheochromocytoma. I know that it's not easy now, but later we'll be very familiar. All these things will become basic stuff later. So the next one is the non-receptor tyrosine kinase. That is, this one don't actually have any receptor, any tyrosine kinase activity in their receptor. The tyrosine kinase activity is localized to the cytoplasm. So it is when the receptor has bonded to the growth factor that interaction is now going to activate a cytoplasmic tyrosine kinase. An example of that is JAK2. JAK2. You see, what I just want us to remember about this JAK2 is that they are predominantly present in hematopoietic stem cells. No, not hematopoietic stem cells. Hematopoietic cells. That is red blood cell, platelets, white blood cells. Those are the things that use this guy. And they respond to cytokines, interleukins, and all those things. So it makes sense for us. And this JAK2 is a cytoplasmic tyrosine kinase. That is, it has tyrosine kinase activity, but it's not coupled to any receptor. It's actually in the cytoplasm. So it's a protein in the cytoplasm with tyrosine kinase activity. And it can drive myeloproliferative neoplasm. So we are saying neoplasm involving the myeloid cells, because we have two categories of cells, the myeloid cells and the lymphoid cells. So anything aside the B lymphocyte and the T lymphocyte, they are myeloid cells. So the lymphoid cells are the B and the T lymphocyte, but the myeloid cells are the other ones. Our platelet, red blood cells, granulocytes, they are myeloid cells. But the most specific myeloproliferative neoplasm that is associated with JAK2 that we must always remember, if you don't even remember anything, remember who wants to help us? The old guys. Who wants to help us? JAK2. Anybody wants to help us? Eh?
The myeloproliferative, that would be
and polycythemia vera.
Polycythemia vera.
No.
God bless you, doctor.
I thought you said malignancy.
Polycythemia vera. Yes, now polycythemia vera, essential
It's a malignancy.
thrombocythemia,
No. You
and
said
myelofibrosis.
No, I get you. Myeloproliferative.
Polycythemia is a
neoplasm,
tumor.
yes.
It's a neoplasm of red cells now. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
polycythemia vera and
Vera.
which one, Dr. Zulia? Which one do you want to say?
Essential. Okay.
Yes.
I know there's essential. What's it called?
Thrombocythemia.
Thrombocythemia.
That's the platelet.
Thrombocythemia, yeah.
And then myelofibrosis for white cells.
Exactly.
Myelofibrosis. Yeah. That's what I wanted to remember. Yeah. Myelofibrosis. Yeah.
So, but we remember that as we go down, the incidence of that JAK2 mutation reduces. So it's highest for polycythemia vera, maybe like 80%. For our essential thrombocythemia, it is like maybe 50 to 70. While for myelofibrosis, about 32. But I feel that it's okay if you can remember polycythemia vera. Very important. So once you see your JAK, you are remembering your hematopoietic cells, like your red blood cells. Overdrive of red blood cell, polycythemia vera. So there's a way they will present. Let's forget about that for now. The next one is BRAF. BRAF has serine threonine kinase activity. It's not high you to remember this. Don't worry yourself. This serine threonine kinase activity too is not coupled to any receptor. It's also within the cytoplasm. But what I just want us to take home with regards to BRAF, based on experience, is that BRAF is associated with melanoma. You see, once you see BRAF, be looking for melanoma, you will find it there. You will see it there. It will be there. I can promise you, when you see the question, it will be there. You pick your melanoma and you'll be happy. If you don't see melanoma, they will associate it with hairy cell leukemia. So, two things that are high yield for BRAF: hairy cell leukemia and melanoma. In fact, there are two things that you cannot forget about hairy cell leukemia: your TRAP, which you are still going to talk about, and your BRAF mutation and TRAP. BRAF mutation is associated with hairy cell leukemia. Melanoma is associated with BRAF. Melanoma is an epithelial tumor. True or false?
True.
False.
False. Melanoma is on the
It's a
skin now.
melanocyte. It's a melanocyte
Oh.
tumor,
Nice
not
observation.
epithelium.
Nice observation.
Abi?
You see,
Okay.
that is the catch. That is the catch. We just assume that it's skin and we're going to pick epithelia. No. Melanoma is on the melanocyte. And melanocyte is a mesenchymal cell. It's not an epithelial cell. So if we're having cancer from the epithelium of the skin, it will be squamous cell cancer of the skin. It will not be a melanoma. So when it's affectation of the melanocyte in the skin, melanocyte in the skin is a mesenchymal cell. So that is a mesenchymal tumor. Don't forget that. Early cell leukemia, BRAF, melanoma, BRAF. You will see it there. I can assure you, you will see it there. Then c-KIT. c-KIT is in two places. c-KIT is known as cytokine receptor. You find it in two places. Our stomach, the muscle of the stomach. There's something we call the interstitial cell of Kajia in the stomach. They are the ones that contain this KIT receptor. Then in the mast cells, so it's okay for us to just remember the muscle of the stomach, the stomach muscle, leading to GIST, gastrointestinal stomach tumor, which is very unlikely that they will ask, because we did not talk about gastrointestinal stomach tumor in the GI section. So it's very unlikely. It's very unlikely. But if they ask it, fine, you already have it. GIST, KIT, as well as the mast cells, mastocytosis. So one that's having mast cell overdrive, mastocytosis. c-KIT mutation can cause that. c-KIT receptor is in the mast cells and the interstitial side of Kajia in the stomach, predominantly in the GI tract. Then we are done with all the receptors and the cytoplasmic tyrosine kinase. Let's go to the signaling molecule. So after you of course overdrive of the receptors or what's it called? Yeah, receptor. You can have overdrive of the signaling molecule. The signaling molecule that we are interested in for now is the RAS. RAS. There's something about this RAS. This RAS has a GTPase activity. For RAS to be active, it has to bind to GTP. When RAS binds to GTP, it is active. When RAS is done with its action, it will now cleave the GTP with its GTPase enzyme to make it GDP. So a RAS that is coupled to GDP is inactive. A RAS that is coupled to GTP, just picture that GTP is the energy form. Of course, GTP is energy rich. So when RAS is coupled to GTP, it is very active. When RAS is coupled to GDP, it is inactive. Yeah, that is very important to remember. But in some tumors, you can have overdrive of a particular form of RAS because we have three forms of RAS. You have the HRAS, the NRAS, and the KRAS. The one that is important is the KRAS. So the code for that is just PLC. Actually, I don't think it's IU to remember PLC. Nobody will really ask you, but we should just know that RAS is actually important for colorectal cancer because there's something called the adenoma carcinoma sequence. So our old guys will remember. KRAS is also driving that sequence. So it's very, very important to remember that KRAS is important in the colon. But if you want to remember the code PLC, pancreatic, lung, colorectal, KRAS is important in driving those guys. So when there's overactivity of the KRAS, it's a signaling molecule that will activate the downstream transcription factor so that it can initiate growth. Then, if a signaling molecule is overactive, it can also cause overdrive of a transcription factor. So what are the transcription factors that can be tilted into overdrive? The c-MYC. The MYC is the transcription factor that we've talked about. The MYC is the transcription factor. So we are looking at the c-MYC, the m-MYC. Now, whenever we remember c-MYC, one thing should come to our mind first: Burkitt lymphoma. I don't think we need to go into the details, but in Burkitt lymphoma, there's just chromosome 814. So 8 is coding for the MYC, the 14 is coding for the immunoglobulin chain of the B cell. Let's just say B cell. And if you have that translocation, that means you are translocating a growth factor, a transcription factor to that B cell. You'll be making that B cell grow too much now, so they will develop the Burkitt lymphoma. That is it. That translocation is actually by by some enzyme activity like Epstein-Barr. So that's why Epstein-Barr can cause Burkitt lymphoma. It can initiate that translocation, and you have that. So overdrive of c-MYC translation factor can cause Burkitt. Overdrive of n-MYC can cause neuroblastoma. So from the name, you can just palm down one quickly. n-MYC neuroblastoma. So there's overdrive of n-MYC in someone that has a neuroblastoma. Yeah. So they will just say the baby has a big abdomen. The mass is localized to the midline. Maybe there's hypertension or there's no hypertension. They can say the baby is having up to obstoclonus myoclonus. Dancing eyes, dancing feet. So those are the clinch. Once you see obstoclonus myoclonus, that is neuroblastoma. It's basic stuff. Like, you can never be wrong. It's one of the clinchers that they give for neuroblastomas. Obstoclonus myoclonus ataxial syndrome. So you see that the eyes are dangling in opposite direction, obstoclonus, because of affectation of the cerebellum. It's more like a paraneoplastic syndrome. We are going to talk about it. Then there's myoclonus, the sudden jerk of the hand, just contracting, myoclonus. Then the baby cannot move, so just staggering, ataxia. So obstoclonus myoclonus ataxia syndrome is one of the big clinchers for a baby or a young infant with abdominal mass. Neuroblastoma, because it's coming from just like the adrenal glands. KRAS, we've said that. Then the last one is BCL2. What did we say about BCL2? We said BCL2 is an anti-apoptotic molecule. So it makes sense for us to say that BCL2 overexpression is an oncogene. Because if something is inhibiting apoptosis, is inhibiting death, is favoring growth, it's an oncogene. So, and it is implicated in causing follicular B-cell lymphoma and diffuse. So we said this when we're discussing apoptosis. Chromosome 14, 18 translocation. 18 is coding for BCL2. The 14 is coding for the heavy chain of the immunoglobulin of B-cell. So it means that when there's that translocation, BCL2 becomes overexpressed, and there's unopposed growth of the B cell. They're going to divide abnormally. So BCL2 overexpression.
Dr. Baba, sorry, is it T1418 or T1814 translocation? Which one?
14. You actually start with the smaller number.
Okay.
So 1418. Yes. So let's talk about the tumor suppressor genes. So for the tumor suppressor genes, you have to lose the activity of that tumor suppressor. So that, because tumor suppressor gene, what they're after is majority of them just want to suppress growth. They can do it by so many mechanisms. We are going to talk about them one by one. So just imagine that something is a tumor suppressor and it loses its function. That means that it will allow tumor to continue growing. That is it. And we have said it that you require both alleles to be gone before they can manifest. Both alleles need to be gone. Not like oncogene that you only need one allele. Please don't forget this stuff, please. For tumor suppressor gene, you need to knock out both allele. That is the chromosome you are getting from the father, the chromosome that is getting from the mother. Both of them are defective. That's what we call the nothing to it hypothesis. So somebody might acquire one mutation from one parent. It means that the other allele is normal. Yeah. So with time, if that normal one acquires that mutation, that's the second hit. The person will develop that condition. So let's look at some of those tumor suppressor genes. APC, adenomatous polyposis coli gene. This one, if you have done GI, we are going to talk about this a lot. So this one is shared with familial adenomatous polyps. So FAP. FAP is 100% shared with colorectal CA. True or false? The old guys. FAP is 100% shared with the.
True.
Yes, there's no catch. It's true. You can even do total colectomy, remove everything, because there's a high chance that colon will develop cancer. Remove it. Yes. FAP, familial adenomatosis polyposis. So that is actually with colorectal CA. And it is actually due to loss of function of this adenomatous polyposis coli gene. How? You see, We were talking about some signaling molecule the other time. So we're talking about RAS being a signaling molecule activating some transition factors. Another signaling pathway is WNT, which can activate beta-catenin. So beta-catenin is like a transition factor. What inhibits this beta-catenin and degrades it is APC gene. Now, if somebody has loss of function of APC gene, you don't have anything to knock off beta-catenin. Beta-catenin proliferates and it will cause excessive growth. So that is how APC can cause colorectal CA. So you might not need to remember the gene product. It might not be IU, but just remember that APC, which is adenomatous polyposis coli, can cause so many polyps in the colon that will cause colorectal CA. I think that is easy to remember. So you don't want to lose this guy. Once you lose it, that is cancer looming, because it doesn't knock off the beta-catenin again, and you have cancer. The next one is BRCA1 and 2. BRCA1 and 2 are also tumor suppressor gene because they help to initiate repair of DNA. So if there's a DNA repair, if there's a DNA damage, so anybody wants to quickly remind us the repair pathway for BRCA? Anybody? How does BRCA, what's the pathway for BRCA repair?
The non-homologous, what's it called?
Are
Repair.
you sure? Are you sure? Non-homologous.
Engine.
Are
Yes,
you
I'm
sure?
sure.
If it's non-homologous, which one is now ATM? ATM is a non-homologous now, Abi. BRCA is the one that they will, put it. They will form the template and they will put it. Homologous recombination. That's BRCA. So I might have forgotten. Maybe someone should just help us check. I might be wrong. It's been a while. So, but I think BRCA should be homologous now. Okay, so that's just by the way. We'll find the answer. So, they shall repair DNA, and this BRCA, they are implicated in two major cancers that I always want us to remember. Very important. Breast and ovarian. Breast and ovarian. Breast and ovarian. Both of them, they go together. They are caused by a problem with BRCA. So in addition to that, you can remember the prostate and pancreatic. It's very rare that they will ask you. But once you see BRCA1 and 2, breast and cancer, because they repair DNA. So it means that when you have a loss of function of BRCA1 and 2, all the DNA damage that has been happening with each cell division cannot be repaired. At the end of the day, the mutations can affect the oncogene and it can drive the cell into cancer. That is it. So the BRCA helps to initiate repair of the DNA. So it means that if you have problem with BRCA and you can't repair DNA and the DNA start accumulating those mutations, they can affect the oncogenes, the proto-oncogene, and they can convert the proto-oncogenes to oncogene, and there will be uncontrolled division. So you want to remember breast and ovarian. Then the next one is CDKN2. This one is not very IU'd, but it's actually a problem with P16. So P16, you guys remember that P53 activate P16. So P53 activate P16, or P21 rather. It's actually P21, but P16 is also part of those protein that works with those P21. So they inactivate our CDKs and our cyclin so that you can move from G1 to GS, from G1 to S rather. So it's implicated in pancreatic lung. I don't feel you guys need to memorize this. It's not really very important. Nobody will ask about CDK twin, but if you want to know it, it's fine. So the melanomas, although what you always remember for melanoma is what? What is the one that we say you remember for melanoma? BRAF, very important. BRAF, melanoma,
Yeah.
BRAF, and hairy cell leukemia.
Hairy cell. Also, for the BRCA, it's actually homologous. I've checked. It's homologous.
Okay,
It's the ataxia telangiectasia that is not homologous.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Dr. Juliet. So, melanoma, lung, and pancreatic, CDK2A, P16. So when you bring down your CDK2N, there's nothing to inactivate this G2S phase because your CDK2N codes for P16. So that means there's no P16 again to block G1S progression. So you have uncontrolled G1X progression and growth. You want to remember it's not very high. Then DCC deleted in colon cancer, very easy. When this gene is deleted in colon cancer, they will develop colon cancer. So it's actually one of the genes that trigger apoptosis. So when you have deletion of this gene, you don't trigger apoptosis of those colon cells. They persist and they undergo malignant change. Then the second one is SMAD4 or DPC4. So that one is deleted in pancreatic CA. So that one is involved both in pancreatic CA and colorectal CA. Then the next one is MEN1. MEN1. You guys remember that we said MEN2A and MEN2B. Please, the old guys should not talk. Who remembers what gene we said you must remember as regards MEN2A, MEN2B? It's fine if you don't remember because this is the first time we are talking about it. But do you have anything that remembers? Eh?
Red.
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 Red. Red. So once you see red, you are thinking of MEN2A, MEN2B. And part of what they share in common is what? Medullary carcinoma and pheochromo, neck and the abdomen. Pheochromo and the medullary. MEN2A, 2B. But MEN1 is different. MEN1 is different because RET mutation is an oncogene. RET is having tyrosine kinase activity. It's an oncogene. But MEN1 is not an oncogene. It doesn't code for an oncogene. It codes for a tumor suppressor gene, which is menin. So this menin also works like CDK2N. It also increases production of this P16, P21, so that they can block G1S phase progression. So when you don't have menin, there's nothing to release this P16 and the other ones. So you have uncontrolled G1 to S progression. So that is that. So MEN2A and MEN2B is RET. MEN1 is menin, which is an antigen, which is a tumor suppressor gene. Menin, a tumor suppressor gene. NF1. NF1 is neurofibromine. Now, NF1 is the one that will now take us back to the activity of RAS. So we said it, that RAS becomes active when GTPase, when it binds to GTP, and it becomes inactive when it binds to GDP. That is when this GTP is cleaved to GDP. Now, what is the activity of NF1? NF1 codes for neurofibromine. What does neurofibromine do? It is a RAS GTPase activating protein. Now, let's look at it together, my people. If NF1 is present and it differentiates into this neurofibromine, and we have said neurofibromine is a RAS GTPase activating protein, it activates GTPase in the RAS so that GTPase can cleave GTP from RAS. And if GTP is cleaved from RAS, what will happen to RAS, guys? Will it be activated or not?
Inactivated.
It will be inactivated.
If GTP is, yeah.
It will be inactivated. Now, if you now inactivate NF1, what do you think will happen to RAS?
It will not be able to function.
No.
RAS will go to town.
RAS will go to town.
RAS will not.
Is that what you
Exactly.
said?
Yes, RAS will go to town.
Yes.
As in unlimited action.
RAS will go to town because we've said it that neurofibromine is a GTPase activating protein that activates GTPase, that cleaves GTP from RAS so that it can silence RAS, so that you don't have mitosis, you don't have cell growth. But once you reduce expression of NF1 and there's no neurofibromine, there's nothing to cleave GTP from RAS. It means that GTP will remain constitutionally bounded to RAS and it will go to town, just like Dr. Antonia said. So that is why before you can achieve neoplasia from tumor suppression gene, you must lose the expression of that tumor suppression gene. So you must lose the expression of NF1. That is that. Neurofibromine. Then the other one is NF2, Melin. This one is not menin, no. So it can be confusing. Me, myself, I confuse them. But NF2 is Melin. Melin is just like Icadherin. We've said it that Melin helps to adhere those cells together to achieve contact inhibition. So that when you adhere the cells together, they don't grow because they are in contact. But when there's a loss of Melin, those cells are not in contact again, they'll begin to grow because there's loss of contact inhibition. So that is why NF2 is labeled as one of the cancers that can happen when there's a loss of contact inhibition. It's because of this myelin gene, myelin protein, which is also known as schwannomin. So we know the way NF1 and NF2 present now. We'll talk about it. I don't want to start talking about that now. So when we get to neuro, we'll focus more on those guys. Another one is P10. 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 So P10, we can easily get it from the name. P for prostate, E for the endometrial, and that is all. Maybe T for the breast. I beg. You know, P10, remember, breast is also part of this P10, breast. Then from the name, P, prostate, EN, endometrial. Then you must always remember breast, endometrial, breast. So it's a negative regulator of PI3 AKT pathway. You see, this pathway is also one of the signaling pathway that can drive cell growth. So when it's a negative regulator of it, it means that it shuts this pathway. It means that when you silence your P10, there's nothing to shut this pathway, and you have excess activity of this pathway, which will cause prostate cancer, breast cancer, and endometrial. So P10, prostate, EN, endometrial, then overall breast. We are familiar with retinoblastoma. It is also a tumor suppressor gene because it blocks G1 to S progression by inhibiting E12. So when RB is activated, it will inhibit E12, and there's nothing to stimulate G1 to S progression. But once you inactivate RB, E12 is free and happy, and it can stimulate G1 to S progression. Two things that you must always remember. Many people will remember that retinoblastoma gene can cause retinoblastoma, but the high flyers will remember that retinoblastoma can also cause osteosarcoma. That is tough. You will not stop there. When they say what are the causes of, or what are the malignancy that can happen for retinoblastoma, we are not going to stop by saying retinoblastoma only. In fact, we are going to even start by telling them osteosarcoma. And of course, everybody knows RB codes for retinoblastoma. So why should I remember that one first? It's very easy. But I will most likely want to remember osteosarcoma. That's easy to forget. Osteosarcoma, inactivity of retinoblastoma, is responsible for osteosarcoma and retinoblastoma. TP53 is also a tumor suppressor gene. It activates P21, yes, which blocks G1 to S phase, just like CDKN2A that blocks G1 to S phase, just like retinoblastoma that blocks it. P53 also blocks it by activating P21. So the cancer for TP53, I feel this one is very important. SABLA. We are going to come across this one a lot. So SABLA. So if somebody has a genetic mutation of this TP53 that is inherited, we call it the Li-Fraumeni syndrome. So Li-Fraumeni syndrome is actually with TP53 mutation. So the code is SABLA, SBLA. So S is a sarcoma, B is a breast/the brain, L is a lung/leukemia, and A is the adrenal gland. So SABLA, sarcoma, breast and brain, lung and leukemia, not liver, please, not liver. Lung and leukemia, then adrenal gland. SABLA syndrome, SABLA. Sarcoma, breast and brain, leukemia and lung, then adrenal. TP53, Li-Fraumeni. Then there's something we call the TSC1 and 2. So one codes for Harmatin, 2 codes for tuberin. Both of them work together as a complex. They activate one receptor they call mTOR. I don't feel we need to know all those details, just compound problem. So let's know that they are also tumor suppressor gene. They inhibit growth. So once they are inactive, there is excessive growth, and they can cause tuberous sclerosis. So we are going to talk about tuberous sclerosis by the time we are doing our neuro. Very important clincher. So I don't want to ask the old guys because I know they will go to town. So let's just stick to continue gradually like this so that we can quickly finish. So we also have VHL. VHL is very common. In fact, we cannot finish RENA without talking about this VHL. Very important stuff. It inhibits hypoxia inducible factor 1A. That's what it does. This hypoxia inducing factor 1E is a molecule that stimulates angiogenesis. So if somebody have expression of VHL, that means that it will inhibit this HIF, hypoxia inducible factor, and there's no way they can produce vessels. So there's no way tumor can develop. But if you take out VHL, because it's tumor suppressor gene, you knock it out. You have overexpression of hypoxia inducing factor, which can induce angiogenesis, because something is hypoxia inducing. I've said it before that once you have an hypoxic environment, the way your body will respond to that is by producing new blood vessels so that it can have more blood flow to supply more oxygen. That's the response. So that is the reason why hypoxia inducing factor can cause angiogenesis. And when there's angiogenesis from angiogenesis, you can have so many blood-related cancers like hemangioblastomas. So once you are seeing hemangioblastoma in a question, you want to calm down to see if it is actually a problem of VHL, that is von Hippel-Lindau disease. So you just be seeing brain, retina, spinal cord, or cerebellar hemangioblastoma, pheochromocytoma, renal cell cancer, your VHL until otherwise proven. The hemangioblastoma part will give you a clincher because we have said it that it will stimulate blood growth, blood vessel growth. So it makes sense for us to say that that's likely to be an hemangioblastoma. Then the last one is very easy. WT1. It's just by its name. WT, Wilms tumor gene. So it's a tumor suppressor gene that is down regulated in someone that has Wilms tumor. So it's also one of those tumor that stimulate apoptosis. So if you have loss of this WT1, there's no apoptosis to take care of those tumors, those renal tissues that they persist, they develop into Wilms tumor. We should just know that WT1, it is implicated in Wilms tumor. Very important. So let's talk about some of those carcinogen. Actually, my people, here we'll be doing some little memorization. You need to be able to remember some stuff. You need to be able to remember some stuff because there's no linking. It just happens. We don't know why. It just happens. People that eat aflatoxin. Aflatoxin is a toxin that is produced by Aspergillus. Aspergillus is a fungi that can grow in stored grains and nuts. So if somebody eats epa or agbado or rice that is stored for a long time, that is now molted, it's now kind of bad, that Aspergillus can grow on it, and when they grow they can release aflatoxin, and when you take that kind of food it can attack the liver. So the aflatoxin attacks the liver and cause hepatocellular carcinoma. So that is one thing that, in addition to HBV, HCV causing hepatocellular carcinoma, aflatoxin can cause it. Alcohol can cause it. Wilms tumor or Wilson disease can cause it. Hemochromatosis. There's so many things that can cause it. Aflatoxin is one of the hepatocellular carcinoma. Aflatoxin from Aspergillus. Another carcinogen is alkylating agent. So if somebody is taking cyclophosphamide, so that is why you don't want to be giving somebody chemotherapy frequently. You want to be spacing it at cycles, so that I can even allow the normal healthy cells recover. By the time you bombard somebody, there's a high tendency that the other healthy cells will become malignant, because if you give somebody overdose of alkylating agents, they work by causing DNA cross-linking, so they can spoil DNA of the healthy cells, and they can affect the oncogene of those cells, or the proto-oncogene, of those cells, and convert them to oncogene, which will lead to uncontrolled proliferation. So they typically affect blood cells. Alkylating agent causing leukemia and lymphoma. Alkylating agent can cause leukemia and lymphoma. It's very unlikely that they will ask us that. But we must remember the aflatoxin, it is important. Then the next one to remember are the aromatic amines like benzidine and 2-naphthylamine. Benzidine is an aromatic amine that is present in dyes. So people that use all these aniline dyes, in Texas. Benzidine is there. Trunaftylamine is present in tobacco smoke. Both of these guys are clinchers for bladder cancer. Bladder cancer. So once you see the question talking about dyes, my people, is cancer, is bladder, is very basic. Bladder, the person working in Texas and having exposure to dyes and all those things, bladder cancer. What form of bladder cancer? Transitional cell carcinoma of the bladder. Because the normal epithelial lining of the bladder is transitional cell. In some situations, you can have transformation of that epithelium from transitional cell or uroepithelium to squamous epithelium, and the person will now develop squamous cell carcinoma. So in most of that kind of situation, you'll have had irritation of that bladder, causing it to undergo metaplasia to squamous epithelium, which will now progress to squamous cell cancer. So anything that can irritate the bladder, like smoking, like schistosomiasis, like stones, all those ones will cause squamous cell epithelium of the bladder. But if you have dull exposure, so smoking can cause both transitional cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder. Smoking. And the particular component of the smoke is the trunaftylamine. That's the aromatic amines that is causing the transitional cell carcinoma. Then the Texite, the dyes, can cause it too. Arsenic, because arsenic can be taken into the body by inhalation of the particles from smelted metal or from herbicide. So if somebody gets exposed to herbicide, maybe the herbicide gets contact with the skin, they can have a squamous cell carcinoma from the arsenic in those herbicides. Or if they inhale that metal particles contain that arsenic, they can develop lung cancer. And of course, I've said it that arsenic and polyvinyl chloride both causes hepatic angiosarcoma. So if they tell us in the question that they're able to see finger-like endothelial cell projection from the liver, that is likely to be angiosarcoma, my people, because what is proliferating there is endothelial cells. And we have said malignant endothelial or blood vessel tumor is what? Angiosarcoma. Benign one is hemangioma. That is it. So, 3 things you want to remember for arsenic. It can get in contact with the skin, squamous cell. They can inhale it, lung cancer. It can get to the liver, hepatic and angiosarcoma. Then asbestosis, they like this guy. Now, I want to add to this asbestos. They can get it from shipyard. They can get it from old roofing. My old people, what is the third one that we talked about that we need to watch out for asbestos? Aside ship and roofing, what is the third one that we say that we can see that we need to beware of?
Mechanic, like engine oil or something.
Mechanic, yes. Mechanic, Dr. Zulia, yes, you are correct. So, mechanic, people that are working on all this oil, all those brake, all those things. Mechanic, you can see it. Mechanic. So, mechanic, we should not get confused that we are not saying roofing now, shipyard. You see mechanic there, you should think towards asbestos. And asbestos can cause 2 forms of cancer. It can cause a bronchogenic carcinoma, that is carcinoma affecting the epithelial lining of the lung, the bronchioles and the lung, or a mesothelioma, epithelium lining the pleural cavity, mesothelioma, lining the pleural cavity, not the lungs, the pleural cavity. There are 2 different areas. So, but as it has been established that asbestos is the only carcinogen that can cause mesothelioma. It is the only. Once you see somebody having mesothelioma, pleural plaques, thickening of the pleura, you are thinking of asbestos. But it doesn't still mean that the most common cancer that is caused by asbestos is mesothelioma. It's actually bronchogenic. So if 100 people are exposed to asbestos, 90 will develop bronchogenic carcinoma, 10 will develop mesothelioma. But it is only asbestos that can cause mesothelioma. That is it. So we worked out for someone that is building, all these people that are using asbestos roof, or people that are building ship, or people that are working as a mechanic, they can develop asbestosis. Tobacco smoke, this one is plenty. In fact, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Just think of anything. That's why smokers are in big trouble, because they can get exposed to any of these things. It's a big problem. So, from the mouth that they are smoking, the oropharynx can under. But one thing about smoking is that majority of the carcinoma is squamous cell. Oropharynx causing squamous cell carcinoma, it can go to the esophagus and cause squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus. Even before it leaves the oropharynx to the esophagus, it will have stopped at the larynx. Squamous cell carcinoma of the larynx, squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus. It can also cause adenocarcinoma of the esophagus. It goes down to the lungs, squamous cell carcinoma of the lung, as well as small cell carcinoma of the lungs. It doesn't cause adenocarcinoma of the lung. It's very rare. Most of the non-smokers have adenocarcinoma, but smokers have small cell and the squamous cell. Then there are two extra organs that you must remember as regards smoking: pancreatic, renal, and bladder. Especially renal is hide. You can see it, and it will be there. So one of the most important risk factors for renal carcinoma, smoke. One of the most important risk factors for bladder transitional cell carcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder, smoke. One of the most important risk factors for pancreatic, smoke. Then you start remembering the other ones from the mouth downwards to the lungs. Oropharynx, it gets to the larynx, laryngeal, squamous cell carcinoma. It gets to the esophagus, squamous cell, as well as adenocarcinoma. It gets to the lung, squamous cell carcinoma of the lungs. That is it. It can go to the cervix too and cause. It doesn't go to the cervix too, but it's just actually with squamous cell carcinoma of the cervix. Yes. So there's also ethanol, alcohol. So we are worried for esophageal cancer. I think I saw a patient that had esophageal cancer from chronic alcohol consumption. The person could not eat again. Oh my God, I've never seen that kind of thing before. There's a mass in the esophagus. The person has taken thousands of bottles of alcohol, causing esophageal cancer, the squamous type. The squamous type. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Julian. So, squamous cell carcinoma for the esophagus due to chronic consumption of alcohol. It can affect the liver, causing hepatocellular carcinoma, and can also affect the breast. Ionizing radiation is another thing that I want us to also remember. Ionizing radiation typically affects two organs that are very radiosensitive, the blood and the thyroid. So if it's going to affect the thyroid, it's going to cause papillary thyroid carcinoma. Then, of course, the blood, leukemia. Then occupational exposure, people that are working with metals, all these smelting industries, people getting exposure to beryllium. So the old guys, beryllium, where does it come from? What occupation? Anybody? What are we looking out for beryllium?
Plane. Aircraft. Plane. Aircraft.
Yeah. Plane. Nice one, Dr. Toby. Thank you. Plane. People working in aircraft building industries. Beryllium. Beryllium can form a granuloma. We said it. Don't forget. You can have granuloma in response to beryllium. Silica also can cause granuloma. And it's also very common in people that work in mining stuff, or people that work in foundries or sand blasting areas, because one of the components of sand is silica, SiO2. So people that are working where they blast sand, foundries or mines, silica, beryllium, those guys typically get inhaled to the lungs and they cause lung cancer. They don't cause any other thing. Like arsenic that will still cause skin, lung, and liver. No. These guys are notorious for lung cancer only. Occupational exposure. Nitrosamines is something that we should not forget it. Nitrosamine, people that eat all this meat that they smoke meat, smoke fish, people that like it, especially all those Japanese. they develop gastric cancer. You see, that's why the staging for gastric cancer is designed by Japan, because it's their problem. It is their problem. So the staging for gastric cancer is from Japan. They eat all this smoked food a lot. So if somebody is eating too much smoked food that contains nitrosamine, it can stimulate stomach cancer. Very important. Stomach cancer, nitrosamine, stomach cancer, smoke food. That is why stomach cancer is very common in Japan. They eat smoked food which contains nitrosamine. So if you guys can remember that story, it will be always very easy to remember what nitrosamine will cause, particularly the intestinal tract type. There's the diffuse type and there's the intestinal type. So the diffuse type is actually from this E. cadherin mutation. Intestinal type is from nitrosamine. So another one to talk about is radon. So we get radon from uranium debris, all those radioactive exposure and all. It causes lung cancer. In fact, it's the second leading cause of lung cancer in the US after tobacco. Radon exposure. So vinyl chloride is the last one. You see it in pipes. Vinyl chloride is in pipes. All these lead pipes, they contain vinyl chloride. It causes hepatic angiosarcoma alongside with arsenic in the liver. So guys, I think we are going to stop here, and we should let's say 1, 2, 3. We'll just try and see, so I will start solving questions too. So do you guys have any question so far? Any question?
Dr. Baba,
Yes, Dr. Toby.
asking about metastasis and invasion. I've seen like a number of questions, and the question is always like, which of the following is the reason? Like, you know, the way they said those questions now, and then you see E. cadherin, you see metalloproteinases, and during your explanation, you said that the loss of cell-to-cell contact inhibition, when the E. cadherin they detach, then metalloproteinase degrades the basement membrane. So in a question that is asking about invasion or a question asking about metastasis, which of those two is the best answer?
Nice one, Dr. Toby. I like that question. Me personally, I will go for the metalloproteinases. Because
not E. cadherin, right?
Yes, because that is what makes it invasive. That is what, because for you to say invasive, it has breached the basement membrane and it has entered outside that cell. It has, surpassed the basement membrane to get to the blood vessels or the other surrounding tissues. Because there's possibility of the E. cadherin mutation happening and it's descending and not still getting, not still breaking,
and it still will not leave. It still will not leave that area that it is. Okay.
So what qualifies it is when it leaves.
Continue. Okay.
Yeah, so when
it must leave.
It must leave.
Okay.
Invasive.
So metalloproteinases are the reasons for metastasis and invasion.
Invasion, yes.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I think I also have a question, maybe to add to what Dr. Toby said. So that E. cadherin loss of cell-to-cell addition, that will probably just be for dysplasia, right?
No, for dysplasia.
Not really, Adi.
Not really. Dysplasia is some specific changes. They are not separating dysplasia.
Okay, they're not separating.
Yeah, dysplasia is just all those loss of uniformity you get, loss of cell shape,
cell size, polarity, and all that.
Then increase in nuclear cytoplasmic ratio, then chromatin condensation. That's dysplasia. So once you see that, that's like dysplastic change. Yes.
Then second is okay. Continue. Sorry. Continue.
I'm done.
Okay. The second one is that Marburg effect. They have aerobic glycolysis. So the way I understood it is that even though the cell has enough oxygen, they still drive to glycolysis, and then they still continue the ETC to provide them with ATP, oxygen and ATP. But in your explanation, you were like, they do it. I didn't get.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get it because I thought it's just driving to, like, even though they have, so, like, normally when there is enough ATP, it gives a negative feedback to glycolytic pathway to stop it.
Okay.
So when you now said they do it just to release 3 carbon atom for their own cellular, what's it called?
Growth.
Their own cellular growth and all.
Yeah.
So please, if you can just like clarify.
Okay. So
Thank
let's
you.
go back. So what it means, the summary is that you want to do glycolysis and stop at glycolysis. You don't want to proceed to ETC. Why? Because if you proceed to ETC, you are going to break down your pyruvate. And you don't want to break down pyruvate. Because pyruvate is what can go back to form our glycosides and all those things that can form carbon atoms. Now let's go back to the statement.
Okay.
You will see the statement now. Because once it goes to ETC, Dr. Toby, you have broken down your pyruvate. It's gone. It's gone. But if you
so they don't have any carbon again to do what they want to synthesize.
They don't have any carbon again to do what they want.
Okay.
So what they just do is that they take, and thank God for lactate dehydrogenase is a reversible enzyme. It can take pyruvate to lactate and it can take lactate to pyruvate. Sure you get. So by the time it's taking the pyruvate to lactate and they are generating 2 ATP, they will keep that 2 ATP and be happy. And they will now convert that lactate back to pyruvate so that it can be a source of carbon atom. So look at the statement.
Okay.
Shift of glucose metabolism away from mitochondrial oxygen phosphorylation towards glycolysis, even in the presence of oxygen.
away from mitochondrial.
You get.
Okay.
That is it.
Okay, wait, sorry. Okay, that means when there is oxygen, that oxygen should be used up in the oxidative phosphorylation as the final electron abi?
No, it should not be used up. What they are saying here is that even in the presence of oxygen, you know that when oxygen is present, it means that there's a go ahead to go to oxygen. Because what is actually stopping the cell to progress to TCA and oxidative phosphorylation is when oxygen doesn't exist. When there's no oxygen, you have to go through the anaerobic pathway, which is which is converting your pyruvate to what? To lactate. Now you are now doing that despite the fact that there is oxygen. You call that aerobic glycolysis.
So, okay, I think I now get it. Okay.
So.
Okay. Oh, okay. The whole presence of lactate in that situation should be in an anaerobic picture.
Yes.
Okay, and I now understand.
Should be in an anaerobic picture.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. It's clearer now.
You're welcome.
No, Dr. Baba, I'm not confused. Anaerobic picture for, is it the glycolysis? Or I don't
Let me say it very well. I meant that the cells, the whole, for you to have lactate in a system means that cell does not have oxygen to go into the aerobic, to enter the TCA cycle. So the fact that the tumor cells are using lactate, even though there is oxygen, is a misnomer. Do you get it? That's if I get what Dr. Babawale is trying to say. I don't know.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Toby. Please, I'm very sorry.
Okay, so no, it's fine. What I meant is that the fact that they are using lactate when there is oxygen is a misnomer, because you could only synthesize lactate from pyruvate in anaerobic respiration.
Yes.
So even though there is oxygen in that system and those tumor cells are still using lactate, that is abnormal. So that's how I get. That's what I'm saying. Anaerobic picture. In when there is aerobic, when there's oxygen.
Yeah. You know that, just to dilate that a little, Dr. Antonia, you know that if there's oxygen, you should not be forming lactate. Why? Why should you be forming lactate when there's oxygen? Take it to TCA and take it to oxidative phosphorylation. But these guys don't want that because they don't want to lose their pyruvate. So what they will do is that they will just do as if, they will pretend as if there's no oxygen, and they will take their pyruvate to lactate so that they can easily generate 2 ATP, then convert that lactate back to pyruvate. so that the pyruvate
Okay.
can now be the source of the carbon atom. The pyruvate and the other upstream molecules, glucose 6-phosphate and all those things that will now get converted to ribulose 5-phosphate that will now be utilized
So
by the
it's by
cells.
taking the metabolic pathway upstream.
Upstream, yes,
Okay.
that is it. So, do you have any other question, Dr.
Yeah, I have just a little question. I know that you mentioned it while you were explaining, and you were talking about the carcinomas that add exception to hematogenous spread. So I don't know if you can just help us list it again. Sorry, please.
So, the kidney and the liver, hepatocellular carcinoma, renal cell carcinoma, then the choriocarcinoma and the follicular thyroid carcinoma. So, FC, follicular thyroid carcinoma, the choriocarcinoma, then renal cell carcinoma, hepatocellular carcinoma. Once you remember liver and the kidney, renal cell, hepatocellular, there are so many things they share in common. We are going to talk about them too later. Then
Okay. So
choriocarcinoma,
the follicular, you said the follicular thyroid, what's it called? Cancer, the choriocarcinoma, the RCC, and the hepatocellular carcinoma.
exactly. Those are those guys. So, Dr. Precious, is she
Okay.
here? You're welcome. Dr. Precious, are you there? Dr. Dr. Precious Akinpelu is not here today. Wow. Okay. There's no problem. Dr. Uh, Dr. Bolali is not here too. Okay. No problem. So, Dr. Princess, is it clear?
I understood some. I'd have to read it again.
Okay. No problem. So, I guess we can call it a day then, so that we can all go and rest. So,
Yeah.
bye bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.